Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Kevin Porman. I'm a developer advocate here at Salesforce. Today I have with me the esteemed Alistair Higginbottom. Do you want to say a few words?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. It's quite a welcome there, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you. Today we're going to be working on recruiting for good. Now, for those of you who are just tuning in and finding out about recruiting for good, this is our project to build a recruiting application from idea, from concept, all the way through something that is ready to be packaged for security review. And we're building this with a series of principles in mind for diversity, inclusivity, and equality. Alistair is acting as our product owner, so he gets, final say in what we are building or not building. And today, on today's episode, we're going to start working on the scope of our project. Now, in the previous few episodes, we've been having discussions with stakeholders. So our first stakeholder meeting was with a recruiter, and our recruiter walked us through two forms of recruiting. The recruiting for a company directly, so I'm hiring for my company, or the second one she offered was the recruiting that I'm going to call agency recruiting, where somebody has hired her company as a recruiting agency to find and fill positions for their company. And we talked through both of those use cases. And then the next one we had was a session with hiring managers. And our hiring managers, we had two of them on, gave us a perspective of what they're looking for in terms of what they need this system to do. Now, we heard everything from they want to make sure that it's super easy for applicants to get their information into the system, to being able to see sort of a pipeline for a job. Okay, who's got going when, who's what status, and when and where they could start or not start, etc. So we've got a bunch of different perspectives, and today what we're going to do is we're going to start filling out what we call epochs and stories. And an epoch is it's a really big set of functionality. They're usually fulfilled not by meeting a set of acceptance criteria, but by having all of the stories related to that epoch completed successfully. So an epoch might be take over the world, and then your individual stories are, as a megalomaniac, I want to take over the world by listening and helping so that I can benefit humanity. And we're going to use that sort of formulaic user story in order to build out our user stories, and then we'll have some acceptance criteria below them. But before we do that, I want to draw your attention to a couple of things. Our chat helper has very graciously pasted in the link to our Quip doc. That's this Quip doc, and we keep our show notes in here. If you've got questions, comments, signed remarks, feel free to leave a message there. You can't type in the main document, but you can leave conversation here for us. And when we go through this, we're going to be adding things in here. And we were talking beforehand, and Alistair, we decided to sort of start off on the personas. Our personas are the people, but not like they're the idea of a people in a position, not a specific person. So I wouldn't say, as Kevin, I want to take over the world. I would say, as, a benevolent dictator, I want to take over the world. And that benevolent dictator, that title, that is our persona. And so we came up with a few personas. And what did we decide we had an applicant? That one's sort of the easy one.
So we went, we had applicant, and then we thought that potentially the experience of the unsuccessful applicant was important too, both from a diversity and inclusion, but also like a corporate reputation perspective.
Yep. We had hiring manager.
A hiring manager, yeah.
And then we split out, what did we say? We were going to do recruiter, and we had agency recruiter.
Yeah, internal recruiter and agency recruiter. And then we were just chewing over the idea of some kind of strategic recruitment lead who would perhaps have different pressures and success metrics for a diversity-based recruitment model.
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out what to title that, because recruiting lead isn't very descriptive. Naming things is hard. This is, lesson one of the day. Of the things in computer science that are hard, cache invalidation, naming things, and off by one errors. So agency recruiter, internal recruiter. I'm going to say, like saying recruiting VP doesn't work either. We could have like a diversity
Head of HR.
Head of HR. I'm not going to use HR. I'm going to say head of recruiting, because the more I say the word R in HR, I feel dirty. So we're not resources, we're humans. Okay, so we've got our personas here, and our applicants. This one's the easy one. This one is someone who is applying for a job, and this is someone who applied for a job unsuccessfully. I can spell. Hiring manager is someone who is. Are they making the final say?
Yeah, and will be the line manager of the successful applicant, typically.
And responsible for defining the job someone is to be hired for. That's awkward. Not happy with that one. An interim recruiter is a recruiter. Recruiter? Working to hire someone into the same company they work for. And so that could be like a contracted recruiter, but it could also be somebody who is a direct employee of that company, but they're working to hire into the same company that pays them. Mm-hmm. An agency recruiter is a recruiter working for a third party to find and validate applicants for a company. And then the head of recruiting is going to be the person in charge of ensuring a diverse and equitable hiring process and experience. That's a good way to put it. Okay, so we've got these personas. Now, as we write our epics or as we write our stories, they all have to contain one of these personas. And if we get to a point where we're trying to write something where it doesn't match one of these personas, then we got to stop and say, what are we really doing here? Because it may be that we've come up with a new persona that we need to address, or it may be that we are phrasing our user story in a way that prescribes how it's supposed to be engineered, and that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to describe what needs to happen, but not how it happens. And that's a fine line, because we want to say, like, use a community, and that's okay. But what we can't say is use a community and then create this LWC component named this. We don't want to be that specific. So when we talk about our epics, let's list them here, and we can just sort of like come up with a few of them. So epics, and we've got some over here. Now, again, the chat is fully open, and I see people like Connie in there. And if you've got an idea for an epic about what you kind of want to see in here, feel free to throw it out there. That doesn't mean we're going to write it down. After all, Alistair is the product owner, so he can be like, no, we're not doing that. He has all the power here, folks. Don't let it go to his head. But if you've got an idea for an epic or a story, feel free to put them out there. But the kinds of epics that I had in mind were things like we want a community, a digital experience for applicants to CRUD. I'm going to say CRUD. CRUD is create, read, update, or delete. CRUD their information and apply or update to jobs. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to need And then so like underneath that, just to give you some idea of epics versus stories, underneath this epic for that, we might have a way for applicants to see feedback when they are unsuccessful, right? And we'll flesh out as a story here in just a second. Connie says she's appreciating it. She's just enjoying the process. I appreciate that too, Connie. But don't let that hold you back. You got something to say? Let us have it. So epics, we've got a digital experience. What are we? What are some other epics we've got here?
Well, I think, given we're not trying to create a recruiting app, full stop, we're trying to create a recruiting app with the focus on diversity. I think, any kind of, we need to have an epic that clearly states that.
Say more.
I had a really nice, I had a really nice one worded out in my head then. I was going to write it down, and then equally I was going to try and encourage Connie to say something, and then I forgot to do both.
Fair enough.
So, yeah, thank you. So what we're looking for, you really said digital experience. We're not trying to enable diverse recruiting. We try to ensure fair and accessible recruiting methodologies.
Enable the creation and maintenance of a diversity, equitable, and inclusive hiring process. Does that sort of get to what you're saying?
And yeah, definitely. The other one that I was going to say before I rudely interrupted myself by thinking about something different, was about we talked about having common terminology, a framework, a common
lexicon,
a common process, lexicon,
I'm having
vocabulary.
trouble connecting. I'll keep trying.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Is that Connie?
My Alexa tried to join us today. Sorry about that. Okay, so a common lexicon. Is that going to be its own epic, or is it going to be sort of its own? Is that going to be?
Well, I think that the epic is create a transparent recruitment journey, transparent and consistent recruitment journey, because that would be more efficient for recruiters, which was one of the key things we wanted. And that impacts on lots of different users that way, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the stories would be about the specific vocabulary used. One would be about consistent terminology.
Okay, I like it. We're gonna need a way for hiring managers to create new jobs. Suddenly I sound like a politician. Create new jobs. To create new jobs, you're tapping your headphones. Can you not hear me? Did I lose you, Alistair? Maybe. 1, 2. I see my audio going out. Hello? Connie, are we having some difficulties with the audio here? Help me out. I can see my audio going out, but maybe it's not. Okay, he says he can hear me. I can't hear him. Did Did your mic get muted by any chance? Do you want to try reconnecting? Okay, try reconnecting. We'll see you here in just a second. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how you know it's a live stream, because things don't always go quite like we want them to. It says they can hear me, but Alistair is not so much. Do you want to try rejoining the rendezvous, closing your rendezvous window and rejoining it? There we go. All right. So while that's going on, we can talk about a way for hiring managers to create new jobs. And then we also need a way for hiring managers to see, and to visualize.
How's that?
Oh, there you are. Very nice. Perfect.
So,
All right, no problem. That's what live is all about. Sometimes things don't work great, or sometimes things go unexpectedly awry. This morning I was on a call with my boss, and my 3-year-old coworker ran in mostly unclothed. So it's the joys of working from home and doing things live via telestreams here. So we have a way for hiring managers to visualize the pipeline for filling a role, or for filling a job. What are some other epics that you can think of?
what about the thinking of the show notes from your recruiter?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot about contracting, both internally and externally, like that. The job request, making those available to the recruiters.
Agency view for job requests, applicant suggestions, and agency view of that process with the company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's a good one. So I'm not saying these are all our epics. We'll probably come up with a dozen more, but let's start taking these and breaking them down into some individual epics and stories. Now, to do this, I want to make sure everyone is able to follow along and comment on all of our epics and our stories. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our epics and stories as issues in our GitHub repository for this project. So I've got this set up here. You'll notice that I've got labels set up for epic, and I've got another one for story, user story. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this over here. So what I'll do is I'll change the title to be a digital experience. I'm going to put in here community in parentheses so that everyone knows what we're talking about. For applicants to CRUD information and job applications. That may not be the greatest way of doing that. And then what we do over here is, instead of having just a bulleted list of things it has to do, what we'll say is something along the lines of, as an applicant. Now notice that's one of our personas. Applicant. What is it they want to do? I want to securely
Advocate for them.
Connie's asking, can I explain the difference between an epic and a story? So I'm going to give you a little bit of like a heuristic. I don't know that it's a concrete definition, Connie. As an engineer, so me, when I sit down to work on a bit of software, I typically, in sort of the Scrum and Agile environment, will have read the story ahead of time and come on and given it a point value. So I'm going to come back and I say, this story is 5 points of effort. Now, what 5 points of effort means is different per team. So my 5 points of effort is going to be different than Alistair's team's 5 points of effort. But as a team, you know what 5 points is. That may be like a day and a half or something like that. And you're going to be able to say, okay, this story is going to take me a day and a half to execute, to build. or 5 points or 13 points, whatever. At some point, though, a story becomes so big that you're going to say, no, this story is so big, it actually needs to be broken up into multiple stories. And when you have a feature or a set of features that are so big that you have to break it into multiple stories, you wrap those stories up in an epic. So an epic, as the name sort of gives away, is a much bigger story than these individual user stories. So when we talk about a digital experience for the applicants to securely input their information and advocate for themselves in response to jobs, what we're saying is that is too big of a thing for a developer to sit down and write over the course of one sprint or one thing. It has to be broken up, and we're going to have, we'll have stories underneath it that are like, as an applicant, I can log into an authenticated community. That is setting up the community, and that's going to be its own bit of work separate from I can see jobs, which is going to be a different thing. And we can go back and forth through that. So the idea between an epic and a story is somewhat fluid, but it's generally that epics are much bigger bodies of work than a story. I hope I got there in the end. So as an applicant, I want to securely create, update, and delete personal information and advocate for myself in response to job openings that I can see. So that I can, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to say personal information and job openings that I can see so that I can advocate for myself as an applicant for that role. Again, the wording is probably not great. Do you have any words of wisdom on that one?
So this is a user story, right?
No, this is an epic.
Okay, super. So I think that the advocating needs to be from like a point of equivalency. That talks to that transparency and the same terminology and what have you. Like, I'm not sure if that's quite if that would be in the right epic. It might be that it's a better fit somewhere else, but I just think, whenever I look at this, this specific example, it's all about, yes, inputting information, but it's inputting information, the right kind of information, which is why we were talking about using the VTMUM, or we're talking about the value of competencies and characteristics.
I think those would be stories underneath it, under like advocate. So let's go ahead and I'm going to submit this issue here. This will be issue 1. You see it there. Now, at this point, anybody who has a GitHub account can come in here and help us refine that, or provide comments, or or just snide remarks if they want on this. Now, and you'll see that it's labeled as an epic. Now, if we wanted to, and just for example, I don't know that we want to do this as a particular order. What I'll do is I'll say story, and this is a demo. And I'll choose the label, and I'll choose story. And what I'll do is I'll say references, or part of 1. Now, hello world. Now when I submit this issue, you can see that this is part of, and if I click on this, it'll take me directly to my epic. So they're tied together. And somebody was, Connie was asking, what is the definition of done for an epic? The definition of done for an epic is all of its stories have been accepted as done. Right?
And that's more of a discussion, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's going to be, we're going to take a feature that we've developed and we're going to show it off to Alistair, and Alistair's going to say, I see how you develop that and you think it meets the acceptance criteria, but you're wrong. Go redo it. Or he's going to say, that's brilliant. You know, keep going. And once we've gotten to the point where he's accepted all of our work for a particular epoch, we can mark that epoch as closed. And this is just a way of keeping track of what needs to be done. Now, there's lots of stuff that this doesn't give us. It doesn't give us an order of what needs to be done. Like, you know, we need to do this before we can do that. We don't get that here. That's for us to figure out when we get to the engineering side of things. We're just going to figure out exactly what needs to be done here. And so I'm going to open, I'm going to go back to my story here, and I'm going to edit it so we can make this useful. And I'm going to say, as a applicant, there is a secure community for me to log into. Now, so that, well, the title is different than the actual story. And we're going to save that, and then it's not letting. Did I do that wrong? We go here, and then, oh, I did it as a comment. That's what it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this comment, and I'm going to edit it, and we'll put in here as an applicant, there is a secure community for me to log into so that I can know my personal data is safe. And then we can do acceptance criteria. And this is where Alistair really gets to shine, because he gets to define what it means for this one to be done. So I'm going to propose an acceptance criteria of, we have stood up a community. A community, I'll name it correctly, a digital experience is configured for metadata for community is in Git, so it's stored in our project. A setup script is created to create a scratch org and deploy the community. Yeah. Thoughts on that?
Is it worth identifying, I'm sure within Salesforce it's automatic, but about legal requirements for storage of personal data, GDPR in EMEA? I'm not sure what it's called in the States.
GDPR and PII storage concerns and requirements are clearly documented and followed. Now, that's a little bigger than engineering, but what that allows us to do is say, you know, Alistair gets to read the documentation about, these are the things we found we have to do, and here's how we did it, and know whether or not we've met that acceptance criteria. So when you're writing your acceptance criteria, they don't always have to be something like you can prove with a unit test. Sometimes they can be a documentation thing, or a like the one above it where a setup script is created. It's a convenience thing to help people who are following along at home spin up an org and get ready to go as quickly as possible. You notice what we're not doing in this is we're not talking about what our community or our experience looks like, right? We'll get into that in a different story, but for this story, it's just standing it up, right? It's there, we can log in, and we are good to go. right? I should also add we probably need our experience to be. You should be able to create your own. You should be able to register yourself. So, self-service registration for the experience community, because ultimately we want our applicants to be able to go to a website, sign up, log in, and put in their information and see the jobs available. So,
and I think on that, I think you would want to also, at this point, I really highlight that you'd be building with accessible design principles as well, so that I don't know, unsighted applicants or applicants that can't read, for whatever reason, have their screen readers work and things like that.
Built with accessible design elements. Design elements so that screen readers, etc., work as intended. I think that's important. Now, when we talk about sort of pointing a story as engineers, we sit around the table and we read a story and we're like, okay, that's going to take 10 points of work. That's going to take 13 points of work. We're not going to worry about figuring out what that pointing value is right now. We're just creating these stories. So I am going to say, though, this is getting pretty big, and so we should probably update that. Now we can create a second issue if we would like about this. So if we were to do a new issue, I'm going to call it a story. I'm going to pick the label and design. I'm going to actually say visual and accessible design of the community. As an applicant, I need the visual design of the community to be pleasant, easy to use, and accessible, so that I can self-service register, create a V2, well, self-service, populate PII, and apply and view apply jobs. You'll notice that some of these get to be run-on sentences, and yeah, it happens all the time. I feel like if I could put my 8th grade English teacher into an agile planning session where user stories are being created and gone through, she would probably have a stroke. But this gives us, and so that, to be clear, I want to point out the story format we're following is as a insert persona. I need what so that I can so on and so forth. Now, we've done these all from the applicant perspective, and we've got these other personas, but criteria, and then we've got part of number 1. And so our acceptance criteria for this one, what do you think that would look like?
Sorry, I can't actually read what the exact words you've written. It's a bit small.
I should have zoomed in. My bad.
That's all good. So for me, I think the excuse me, accessibility. There's technical accessibility and then design. Yeah, it's good quality design, which I guess complies with brand standard. As a product manager, I definitely know my place, and I would not be approving brand standard or approving, obviously I would be providing the UX, I would be using a designer to provide the UX. So there would need to be approvals from the design and creative team. And then in terms of technical accessibility, you're looking at voice to text, compatibility with voice to text, and then compatibility with screen readers.
How would say more about the voice to text compatibility? Because I'll be honest with you, when I think of voice to text, like the thing that comes to my mind is how Siri always translates a certain word I can't say to duck. And I feel like that's probably not a great thing we want happening in our application. So what do you mean by voice to text compatibility?
So I'm no great expert here, but it'd be third-party apps that an applicant would already be using. So, for example, if they had, for some reason, they weren't able to type, they would use a voice-to-text third-party app that would update, which is where the sort of universal design principles come in. The way that you design the UX of your site and the componentry you use should be standardized and so that it's accessible. So this is where using crazy fonts and obviously impacts on the ability of screen readers, but then using fields that are not represented in a standard keyboard, for example, would upset a voice to text app. So yeah, and again, this is where as a product manager, I'd be checking in with my designer, my creative team, and say, I think I want to be able to do this. How can we do this in a way that is accessible? And they will rely heavily on their degree and what they learn about accessible design to identify that.
Okay, so I've got follow up with an accessibility design specialist here. I'm going to annotate that with the componentry are standardized. I-18N standards compliant.
Yeah, and I do think this is probably quite, we're focusing a lot on this within this app. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's good practice to always be following accessible design. If you're trying to create an equality focused or a diversity focused recruitment app, then you very much need to empower and enable people with all abilities to apply for jobs. So I think the focus is very explicit here, whereas perhaps it'd be inferred in most projects.
Yeah. Connie is saying, priceless. Voice to text is a standard feature for a few of my non-English speaking friends, which sort of drives home your, voice to text request. I'll be honest with you, I'm clueless when it comes to that. So we've got a couple of sessions in the new year where we're going to be talking to design team, and we're going to be asking them to help us put together a consistent Salesforce design language adhering setup for what our site looks like and all that stuff. I'm going to ask them about this accessibility stuff too, because they tend to know more about that than I do. So I promise we'll get to more of that accessibility stuff later here, but for right now, let's go ahead and submit this. These are larger stories that are more setup things. Let's give a concrete one here before we lose too much control here. So I'm going to say story, and I'm going to choose the label, and the label is a story. And then up here, we're going to say, as an applicant, I can create a V2Me. Now, Alistair, you get to say like, no, that's not what I want. So feel free to chime in here. But I was thinking, if we have this idea of a V2Me where we've got competencies, we've got examples of that competency, where we're doing that sort of stuff, and we're setting up this sort of next generation CV or resume that we're going to pass around to hiring managers. We have to have a way for them to create that because we want it in a very specific format. Now, one of the things our hiring managers, I think it was Amber, said a couple weeks ago was that she really wanted to have a way for us to be able to like import stuff from like LinkedIn. And I said I didn't know if that was going to be in scope. That seems like a potential can of worms. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But before, what we're trying to do is intentionally have them fill it out our way so that we can be more equitable in this. Her concern was that people are going to be like, I don't want to do that. I'm just not going to apply for this job because that's a pain in the butt. And I get that, but I also like, how do we overcome the issues that we all know exist in recruiting as they are without forcing some kind of change somewhere? And if we make the focus point of that change in what a job is and what kinds of things you present to show you're capable of that job, if we change those two bits, then I think we're off to a good start. But that also is going to raise the barrier for entry. So if we put in here, as an applicant, I can create a V2Me.
So the V2...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so with the V2Me, one way that we've looked at this is from the user's experience, the applicant's experience, is they can fill out a V2Me and then they don't need to do anything any more than that. They fill it out and then they can download that and use it as a cover letter because it says some really interesting things about them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good general cover letter. The next step, as you say, some people will be like, cool, thanks for that. I don't want to apply for a job using this though. Cool, whatever. But for those that want to see the insight that V2Me can give about them, they're given the option. Download and print this V2Me and use it as a cover letter, or explore roles that the insights this V2Me gives us through this. So for further context, this is from the deeper applicant side on other parts of a project, but still it's the same thing. V2Me is just a great way to talk about yourself, set out your stall about where you want to get to in life, but then that's where the system needs to give them that jumping off point. Mm-hmm. Download and print it or sign up.
Okay, so let's see if I can map this back here. So facilitates the guided creation of a V2Me.
Mm-hmm.
Allows applicants to then create an account and look at jobs that match their V2Me.
Yep.
Or download the V2Me as a cover letter. So it seems like our flow is they go to the site, they create this V2Me, then they can create a community user and save that V2Me as something that they can then come back and update. Allows.
Yeah, so the concept we're looking at is taken from e-commerce, and it's the explore and find track. So your V2Me is your first interaction. You choose to progress and you graduate to the explore track, where you can explore roles that would match. And again, thinking diversity and inclusion, you may be net new to the workforce, not sure what sort of jobs you want to do, but you know who you are and you know what you care about and what your characteristics are, your competencies are. So you submit that at that higher level, and that says, hey, you display customer service and supporting others. You could consider being a chef, a BDR, a da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then if you want to go, so you see roles, but then if you want to see jobs, you then need to update with more traditional information. So it's like, you should consider being a chef. Show me chef jobs. there's a whole lot of list, but you then need, and what we're thinking is that the user, the applicant, will have a couple of jumping off points where they're continuing to really clarify their search, but they're getting something out of it at each level. They're getting value at every level, rather than a LinkedIn style thing where it's all about absolutely everything that you think as someone that may or may not know onto your profile. Like, you sign up to LinkedIn and it's like, you've got a rubbish profile, make it better. Okay. You just keep throwing anything at it until it says you've got a better profile.
Right.
And then you go out trying to think about, well, what jobs do I want to do? But is the information right for the job? So we're trying to flip that around.
So you said borrow from e-commerce, you said explore, and what was the other word you used?
Explore and find.
And find.
So it's kind of like, imagine like Trivago or Airbnb. Explore the south of France, and then it's like, find hotels here, find restaurants here, find whatever.
Yep. So explore an ever more refined set of roles, then find jobs in those roles. I like that a lot. So
I do wonder if you and I are sort of veering away from the recruiter's perspective, though, here.
Well, this is from the applicant's perspective. Remember, our persona on this one is as the applicant. I think that this is probably its own story. Do part number 1. I'm going to submit that. Before I forget, I'll put this next one in. Now, you notice we're not doing this real quick. We're going to do a lot of this offline. Sorry, viewers. Story.
They will breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah. Like, as an applicant, I can explore roles and then find jobs in those roles so that I can match my competencies and experience with open jobs. That's not quite true. So that I can advocate. So I can.
Can I add an extra word of characteristics, competencies and characteristics?
Competencies and characteristics.
And that's really what the VT1 gives us, isn't it? It's, what are your values? What are your drivers?
Yeah. Acceptance criteria. We're going to have explore, and so given a V2Me, explore matching roles in a ever more refined way. Say that again?
Well, it's so you explore the roles, and then the more information you put, you then give the roles lead on to a specific job search, don't they?
That lead to a specific job search, i.e., your characteristics lead us to think chef would be a good role. Here are the chef jobs we know of.
Yep.
Okay, I like that. Let's do part of number 1. Submit new issue. Now, at this point, we have 10 minutes left. We've only looked at one epoch, really, and that's totally fine. Yeah. We've had some great interactions with Connie. I want to open it up to see if anybody else has questions, comments, or snide remarks on that. And if not, what I'm going to suggest we do is we sort of create the epics for the other ones that we've identified over here. So we've got digital experience for that one here, and we're going to have we'll have one. Now this one, I was thinking about this. Create a transparent and consistent hiring process focused on diversity, quality, and inclusivity. But what would our persona be there? And I think we may need a different persona here. We may need this either falls under head of recruiting, depending on whose perspective you're looking at it from, or it falls under sort of the system admin.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different perspectives for that one. I think it's probably one of the broader ones. So 1 second, I'm just going back onto the quip. Transparent and consistent hiring process is important for, say, head of recruiting. But also, if you think about like an agency recruiter, if the process is consistent, they will be able to advocate for their own work and the value they add to their clients. So it's not just a case of it's consistent to help the applicant. I think it helps probably most of the users. You know, if it's consistent and transparent, an unsuccessful applicant will be able to understand what stage they got to within a process, and then ask questions. Why didn't I progress? And ask for specific feedback.
I guess my question is, which of these personas is doing the creation of that transparent and consistent hiring process? Because it'll benefit just about everybody involved. I agree with you there. But who's doing this work? And I'm going to go with, I think it's going to be head of recruiting, that persona.
Yeah, so I hadn't really focused in on the create word.
It's okay. So let's create a new epic over here. We'll do a new issue. And we'll do epic. And we're going to say create a consistent and transparent hiring process.
So this, I know, just from my understanding of the epic, so this would be, I don't know, modular features that someone who wants to hire can pull in, pull features into a process and so we're producing the features that they can then use.
Yeah, this is where people would be able to say, okay, first off, we're going to have a competency review, and then we're going to have a initial interview with the recruiter, and then we're going to have a passing it on to the hiring manager or not decision. So as the head of recruiting, I need to be able to create and update a single process that all applicants go through, so that I can focus on diversity, quality, and inclusivity in the process, while still keeping applicants informed
and
like, what is it we want to say when we reject them?
Well, I think I would question that though, fella,
okay.
If I'm honest. I think that what they need to be able to do is create this process from consistent modules, because your process for hiring an executive and front of house staff is probably going to be different. What we need, the consistency we need, is knowing if you go for a panel interview, this is the process of that part of the journey. If you go to a talent review, that's this. If it's a group interview, it's this. So they need to be able to simply and easily pull that into a workflow per type of job, per level of job, but it still needs to be transparent, so that so that the applicant can say, well, what stage I'm at, and the recruiter can say, well, you're at this stage, and looking at the workflow for this type of head count, you're going to be and they can explain it. But the actual process needs to be highly flexible, not one process, like one workflow, because if you're looking at this from an equity perspective, potentially, I don't know, if it was the same process for everyone and it involved making my way into London and I was currently shielding because of COVID, that process isn't equitable. If it is, you need to come to a grad day, but actually I have, for whatever reason, I can't commit to a full day in person, then it's not equitable. So the process will be different for each role, and that builds in, rather than equality, equity. It allows people to get the support they need to be there, sort of give their best performance. But it's the features of that process that need to be standard.
So I just wrote, as the head of recruiting, I need to be able to create and update a single process from a consistent set of modules so that every applicant for a given role follows the exact same process. So it's not a I need to be able to create and define and update a process, a workflow, a process.
Yeah.
For each role from a consistent set of modules so that every applicant for a given role follows the exact same process. Okay, I think that's good. And so acceptance criteria.
A consistent set of terms for the stages of the process.
And this is where we could say something like, we need a visual way of creating this process. I need to be able to like drag and drop these blocks into...
Yeah, I was going to say a visualization into a workflow.
A process from predefined modules.
Just looking back to the wording of the original Epic.
Transparent and consistent hiring process.
I think those the process, I'm just trying to think from their perspective, I'm trying to think about like feedback and how people get informed what stage of the process they're at, and also how they get informed if they've been unsuccessful, or like how that process actually helps. How is it transparent? Like, how do people see that process?
Would you say that each module has its own communication points?
Yeah. Because again, like if you had that set up, hello John, you've been invited to a board meeting. That means you need to be here at this time. Information. You will hear back from us on the back of that within 3 working days. Hi John, you attended a board meeting on this day. You weren't successful at this point. People that met you gave this feedback. Poor John.
Okay. Poor John. He's not being very successful. We have 1 minute left. What other sorts of acceptance criteria do we want to put in this one?
I think some kind of reporting on applicant attrition at each stage.
That's a good one. I hadn't thought about that.
Because that adds value, doesn't it, to the recruiter?
Oh,
Why
yeah.
do they invest in this? Well, actually, they get better insight to their own process.
Why is everybody dropping off after the group interview? Maybe I have bad interviewers.
Exactly.
All right. Well, at this point, I'm going to submit this. We're going to have to keep working on these. We're going to have a second live stream all about this. And I say live stream, that one's going to be pre-recorded. So you can feel free to communicate with us via the chat, but we won't see it there because it'll be the day before Thanksgiving here in the States. and I, for one, will be with family. So we're going to pre-record that, and then we'll publish it next Wednesday. You'll be able to tune in and see that anytime on YouTube. If you've got questions, comments, snide remarks, you know where to leave them. And I look forward to talking to you and seeing you all 2 Wednesdays from now. Thank you much.
Thank you.